Well, we're joined now in the studio by the global strategic analyst Marco Vicenzino. Hello again. Do we have any clue right now tonight as to what kind of proposal the Greeks are bound to make to the Eurozone then? It's a bit surprising that nothing was put forward today.
I mean, it's more speculation as to what's being offered. I think they're buying time. They're playing for time. They feel they have that mandate, and there's a key date. It's July 20th. That's when over $3.5 billion will be due to the European Central Bank. He feels that he's going to try to drag it as much as possible to try to get the best deal possible. But I think he's misreading the determination of many members of the Eurozone, not only just Germany, but other states, those who had bailouts, Spain, Ireland, Portugal, and then plus you have the states of Central and Eastern Europe, who also, they had to go through a very tough time in their transition from communism to becoming members of the European Union. Many of those actually Eastern European states technically are poorer than Greece. So all these different states throughout the European Union are basically saying, we're not going to give you an easy ride. We're not going to reward you for your sort of intransigence. And I think from the Greek side, it's their idea is that we have a popular mandate. We'll take our time, and we're going to get the best deal possible before we sign anything. But what it does is that, it increases the level of distrust and animosity between both sides. And secondly, it's as if they're dealing in two different universes. They're speaking two different languages. And it might be to the point where when it gets it's getting to the edge, but when it gets to the real edge, it'll be too late by then.
Well, a lot of talk today, yet again, about the possibility of some kind of write-off, perhaps a write-off of all of the debt. But I think the German finance minister, Schäuble, was saying today that within the EU treaty, you can't do that. And apart from anything else, that would give Spain, Portugal, and the likes of Ireland some maneuverability as well.
The idea of write-down, I think, at this stage is very difficult. Reason being is that because all these members of the Eurozone countries, they're looking and they're saying, you know, we haven't seen any reforms. You've already had two bailout packages, and you've read, not just this Tsipras government, but the previous government, the Samaras government. The complaint is that they still haven't implemented any of the reforms that they promised, and yet we've given them the money. So before we give you any more money, we want to see those reforms in place. So it's a sharp divergence.
Is that a conflict between the Eurozone finance ministers and the International Monetary Fund? Because I remember last week the IMF was suggesting that, look, we must really all appreciate that these guys can't pay this money back. It's far, far too much. We think you should write off $53 billion. There's a conflict there.
Definitely. I mean, the IMF is a secondary creditor. The European Union is obviously a primary creditor. So the secondary creditor is telling the primary creditor it's best to have a write-off, or it said specifically Greece will need over $65 billion over the next 3 years. And the way the IMF looks at it, it's as another member country out of over 100 countries that are members of the IMF itself. So it's looking at Greece from a global perspective and saying that many other countries throughout the world have had their debt written down, places in Africa and developing countries. Why can't you do it for one of your own? But in the case of the Eurozone, it's far more complex. It's not just it's a different, it's not a national state, it's a supranational state with treaties and guidelines. And the idea, once again, is if you reward one, it's going to set a precedent for all the others. And from a political perspective, if you look at the three other bailout countries, being primarily Ireland, Spain, and Portugal, they all have center-right governments. So these are center-right governments that are going to be up for elections. The Spanish government's up for elections at the end of 2015. The last thing they want to do is once again, setting that precedent.
As we speak, we're looking at pictures of people queuing yet again outside Greek banks. The Greeks, Mr. Tsipras is calling for the ECB, the European Bank, to allow, what is it, 3 billion euros worth of credit right now to keep that banking system alive. But I suppose a deal needs to be done of some form until that money comes through, or not.
The ECB operates purely from an economic perspective, technically. What's going on now is largely political. These last stages of these negotiations between the finance ministers of the Eurozone. So I think right now the ECB is going to be taking most of their signal from the political leaders. So before they actually issue anything, if the word comes from the political leaders of Europe, primarily from the de facto leader of Europe, Chancellor Angela Merkel, if that happens, and then they may obviously issue more liquidity, keep the banks afloat, but on its own, it's unlikely to make a decision.
What kind of internal pressures must Mr. Tsipras be under right now?
All along, the biggest pressure for him has come from the hard left of his coalition, the left faction. It constitutes about 1/3, but it's a very influential 1/3. And I think if it had not been for that 1/3, he would have had a lot more flexibility. A deal may have been signed right by now, but the problem was that had he signed the deal without the agreement of that far left party, he would have it's his own party, would have imploded. His government would have fell, and that's one of the reasons why they did the referendum. The referendum being it was a way of avoiding that decision, abdicating that decision to the Greek people, and then once he got his 61% through a referendum, which in my opinion was flawed, that he says that's the mandate I have. I have a mandate from the Greek people. So he's approaching this and he's operating based upon that premise.
What about Jean-Claude Tsakalotos? He's not had time, I suppose, to shine yet, the new finance minister. But as an aside, I mean, I was reading today that this guy is a billionaire, apart from anything else, with this left-wing government. What's that about?
I mean, Tsakalotos has been involved in the process of negotiations. The first time when Varoufakis was sidelined was actually in May. There was a meeting in May where the other finance ministers became very angry with Varoufakis and made it known that they don't want to deal with them anymore. From that point onward, you had a lot of Tsakalotos and some others who started to get more involved in the process. So the fact that Varoufakis is left, it's not that Tsakalotos is more a new face. He's been someone who's been involved with the process throughout. Now the only difference is that his face is more public because now he's officially the minister.
Marco, thank you very much indeed for that insight yet again. Thank you very much.